Mike, good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Nice to be here, Clayton.
So everyone, we got Mike Simonsen here, the founder and CEO of Altos Research. And Mike has kind of built Altos around this question that we're all asked frequently, and we all have to think about how to answer. So I'm going to start the interview with the question that Altos seeks to solve day in, day out for housing professionals. Mike, how's the market?
How's the market? It's a rapidly changing market. There's been a bunch of signals this year that have been fun to watch, namely the inventory trend. So available inventory of unsold, homes sitting on the market started the year at ultra low levels. So everybody knows that by now. And then in May, June, July, as rates started spiking, we could see inventory climbing. And for a while, I thought that meant that inventory was going to keep climbing and we might get back to the previous normal levels. Like normally right now, this time of year, we might have 1 million single family homes on the market. And even in 2019, there were like 950,000 or something like that at the end of September. And right now there's 560,000. And so significantly fewer. So for a while, I thought we were going to get back up to normal. And then that didn't happen. Like we topped out. So we have more than we did. The market slowed down a lot. And it's really buyer demand that slowed down. So sellers don't have any urgency to sell. If you own a home, you have a lot of equity and you have an ultra low mortgage. So the inventory climbing isn't really because sellers are flooding to the market. It's because buyers slowed way down. And then buyers picked up a little bit actually in August, surprisingly. And I think that as rates went back under 6, like close to 5. And then in the last few weeks, they've spiked up again. And we can see buyers slowing down really quickly. It sure looks like in the data that they stopped abruptly when rates spiked from under 6 to 6.5 to like 7, it looks like this week.
Yeah. So you jumped straight into all of the data that housing professionals need to know and all of the topics we'll hit on in this conversation. So Mike, the question though, how's the market it's nuanced to who's asking. And I feel like as housing professionals, I've talked about this on the podcast before, you have a little bit of a different response if you're a real estate agent and you're talking to a first time home buyer, or you have a different response if you're Mike Simonsen and you're answering the question at a neighborhood barbecue. So how do you help real estate agents answer that question or loan originators answer that question for someone who's a first-time home buyer and who's seeing the headlines about being the home prices rapidly rising, interest rates at 20-year highs? Like, how do you help housing professionals answer the question to kind of the uninitiated, the person who might be buying a home for the first time, and give them the context they need to help give their client or their neighbor confidence in how they're thinking about their housing decisions?
Yeah, I've asked this question on stage before in front of, hundreds of realtors, and I say, how's the market? And even in the depths of the housing bubble burst, there's a big group of the audience that is trained as a real estate professional to say, when somebody asks you how the market is, there's only one answer. It's great. And it's
really great for who?
Even when it's not, even though it's not great. So I like to teach that we answer that question with the data. So how's the market? Remarkably, there's still a lot fewer homes available than there are normally. And there are more now. So buyers now, if you're a well-financed buyer, you have more option now than you have had in several years. So those for answering that barbecue question, right? Answering it with a little bit of data is how we bring the confidence and credibility, as opposed to answering it's great. It's the real estate professionals, sales professionals in general, we're trained to, you don't want to be Debbie Downer, right? So you got to be positive in that answer. But people also know exactly what's happening. And so it's really a call for you to establish your expertise and use some data. And so a little bit of data, and like the first time homebuyer question is really fascinating, right? So, yes, rates are way up, and the amount you can afford, the amount of house you can afford for your payment is way down. It's very obvious. On the other hand, first-time homebuyers during the pandemic were just destroyed by people who could make cash offers and overbidding. And so it's like actually the first time in a long time that first-time homebuyers don't have the bidding war competition that they've been faced with. And so it's like those are new conditions that we haven't had in a long time for first-time homebuyers. If there's a little bit of optimism in there, it is in that sense for first-time buyers, like they, and when you buy the house the first time, you go to, buy your first home, it's often driven by life events. It's, we had a second kid, or, we got the promotion, whatever the life events are. And as opposed to a purely mortgage rate driven decision. And so like those life events still happen. And so now it's like, it's maybe we can buy a home where we were, we tried before and we just kept getting beat up.
When talking about data, it's very important to understand the context behind the data. And there's been a lot of talk in the last month about increases in inventory. And last week in the Altos report, you shared with your subscribers that there's 26% more homes on the market than at the same time last year. But you also took a step further and took that into historical context. So what should home buyers understand about the historical context of home inventory in this rapidly changing market that we're in right now?
So, we are 40% fewer homes than normal. Available inventory of homes in the U.S. has been actually declining almost every year for over a decade. Coming out of the pandemic and coming out of the housing bubble burst. And we that is because as Americans, we end up buying and converting our homes into more investment properties and not selling them, not relisting them back on the market. And so each year there's fewer and fewer homes available on the market. Then the pandemic accelerated that. And so we went from, normally right now we'd have 1 million single family homes on the market. And, there's only 560,000 right now. That means that buyers, next spring, while there's significantly less competition, there's not like a flood of distressed homes listing, and all of a sudden I've got a little bit of cash, so I can swoop in and find this, bargain of a deal. And in fact, markets all over the world are in turmoil. So the housing market is definitely, feeling that and has some risk in things like home prices too for next year. But under a certain number of scenarios, a certain likelihood that because there's actually so few homes available, it may be difficult for home prices to decline significantly. There are, if you have supply and demand, supply is still really low. And so demand's fallen way off too. So there's definitely market implications that we're going to deal with over the next year or two. But it's not like the stock market or something like that where things are, can crater that fast.
When we look at the Altos data, you shared that we've seen a steady decline in the volume of the inventory volumes over the last decade. When you look at the data, those inventory volumes continued to decline as we went through record purchase numbers in the low rate environment that was 2020 and 2021. So I've pontificated with this theory that it's not just fewer houses being listed. or maybe it's not fewer houses being listed, but it's the speed at which homes are turning in the market as well. Has the Altos data revealed any long-term historical changes in days on market that might be aided by technology and the discoverability of the right homes for sale? Or I'm trying to kind of triangulate to how we've seen some markets over the last decade where volumes of mortgage purchase volumes have shot through the roof. But at the same time, we've continued to see this decline in available inventory, which seem to kind of be like conflicting data lines.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think the speed with which homes are purchased actually contributes to that active inventory being lower. And you can see it in a few things. Maybe there's some technology things there, but there's definitely some marketing techniques that happen.
Yeah.
And the marketing techniques are, we're pre-listing this house and we're shopping it around to the other agents in our brokerage, and it's an exclusive listing. And now, oh, hey, day one, listed. Oh, we're taking offers this afternoon, and so it's essentially spend zero time on the market, and these are sort of technology, but kind of like they're like marketing or sales tactics that brokerages are using, and so we track it as a phenomenon we call immediate sales. So these are ones that we can see pending contract that were essentially never active on the market. And it was a phenomenon that really exploded during the pandemic. And there was a chunk early, beginning of this year, late last year, when a third of the homes that were going into contract in a given week they were essentially immediate sales. And so, it's like, whether it's like, I'm doing enough pre-marketing that the day it gets listed, we start taking offers. We're gonna take offers by Thursday. We're gonna have decision on Saturday, and the house, like if you're just going in and shopping as a home buyer, it's like a first time home buyer, you don't even get that. Like it's not even active market. Like it's gone, and so that immediate sales phenomenon is really noticeable over the pandemic, and it's obviously shrinking now. There's fewer of those, and it'll be really fascinating to see in a weak buyer environment. Like, do those brokers who were claiming that exclusive listings were like some sort of special asset that they have, does that evaporate? Like, is that just a function of ultra cheap money, hot market? And there's probably some of the other technology things that do it, but I think technology is mostly about, it's like the transaction time rather than necessarily the offer time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like immediate sales is something that I think our newsroom at Real Trends and HousingWire should be digging into a little bit more and watching how that trend evolves. We certainly see that pretty pronounced here in Dallas, where some of the more Tony neighborhoods of Dallas have many more signs in front of them than there are actually listings on the MLS, and that is those exclusive listings, the pre-marketing that goes on for an extremely long amount of time, and you also see that kind of keeps out some of the agents who aren't as experienced or networked in the neighborhoods. And I think it's part of what we see going on in the market right now, and the flight to quality. As volumes are down, the most productive agents seem to be getting more business. And if you're a buyer, working with one of those productive agents is extremely important, because you might not get access to some of those immediate sale opportunities if you're working with a less experienced agent or just waiting for something to hit the websites.
Yeah, exactly. If it's one of those things. Like I've been in the industry now for 16, 17 years, and you hear over and over again what am I paying a real estate agent for? All they're doing is showing me the houses, and it turns out that there's a lot of nuance in the process that requires a really good real estate agent, and also that it turns out that consumers are willing to pay for that. They keep paying for full service, even though that there are a lot of discount options out there, most of the market still pays for a full service agent.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. So, Mike, you teased the concept of how mortgage interest rates are impacting home sales. And I think everyone that listens to this podcast knows that rates have shot up over 100 bips in the last 30 days. And the last week's announcement from the Fed, from Jerome Powell, on a 75 basis point increase didn't do anything didn't help rates, and the commentary around future increases in October, November, and December, gave capital markets a little more concern, and we've seen rates kind of tip toward 7%. So since last week's Fed announcement, what have you seen happen in the listings and contract data that surprised you or not surprised you?
I actually, we can trace the data, the changes in the data to not the Fed announcement per se, but actually before that, like the week or 10 days before that, rates started jumping again. So they went from somewhere in the 5s to mid 6s in that couple of week span. And the way we notice it is in the the total inventory count, and you can see that what's happening is that there's not a flood of new listings happening. There's actually fewer new listings happening than recent years in late September in any given week. But inventory is climbing. And inventory had been starting to decline through August. And then all of a sudden, we've now got a couple of weeks in a row. And it looks like this is going to be a third week in a row of rising inventory in late September. It's not totally unheard of for inventory to rise late September. 2018 inventory rose late September. And that was also in a rising interest rate environment. So, you could see that that was the last time rates rose. At that time, they rose from 3.9 to 4.9. And now they've gone, from 3 to 7. Like, that's a dramatic difference. And so now it's almost like we can see that reaction week to week in there. And so it's going to be fascinating to see what that means for the second half of the last quarter. Does normally in October, starting in mid-October, inventory starts declining week over week. Either people are buying houses, taking them off for the holidays. You're not listing new homes, going into November generally. You're like, we have significantly fewer homes on the market through the holidays. And then that resets the second week of January and starts climbing again. But it's going to be fascinating if nobody's buying anything in that period, does inventory climb into October and November? That would be really fascinating to see if that happens. That'd be a pretty bearish signal for like home prices in 2023.
And I know that Altos runs an inventory forecast model. Like, do you account for the fact that like a pause in rising inventory in Q3 and Q4 and a pause in purchases, could that create a demand or kind of like backup in demand that could come to fruition in 2023 if we see rates normalize or knock on wood, even give us back a few basis points?
Yeah. The model is not sophisticated enough to think about those things, but we can actually see that happened this year. So what happened was on the supply side, as rates started rising in late first quarter, we had inventory climbed in April, May, June, pretty dramatically. And then in July, inventory went bloop and turned sideways, stopped climbing. And so, it seems pretty clear now that much of the new listing volume, that real steep climb in, say, June, those were home sellers who were thinking, I'm going to sell this summer, and the longer I wait, the worse it's going to be. And so they pulled that supply forward by listing in May and June as quickly as they could. And then when July happened, they're like, now they're like, those are already in the market. So that pulled forward. So there are phenomena like that actually do shift that. So, it could push demand, into the spring. Demand falls off over the holidays anyway. And so, and so it really is, like it's like an entirely different market between now and the second week of January. We're going to have a whole bunch of different macro variables. Do they look worse or scarier? Do rates look better or worse? And then buyers are going to start making entirely new decisions for 2023.
I mean, you talk about some of the historical trends about volume falling off over the holidays, but we have seen over the last 2 years in this COVID environment, a lot of our historical seasonal trends get broken by quarantine and low interest rates. I guess that's it. Quarantine and low interest rates have changed some of the seasonal trends.
Work from home and low interest rates. Yeah,
exactly. Got to have a home office like this so you can. So, do you see some of those seasonal shifts that we saw in 2020 and 21 potentially playing out in 2022? Or do you think we're back in an environment where we're back in this traditional spring listing, summer selling season, and the winter is, cold turkey?
The market was trying to get back to its normal seasonality this year. We've watched a number of bullwhip effects, they call it, in the economy, where freight shipping costs went skyrocketing and there was no shipping containers, and now that's plummeting again. And so we're seeing these, we've seen them in this, the COVID recovery economy. And so in a certain sense, that could happen to the housing market. In other words, we had, the one side of the bullwhip was demand powered all the way through November and December of 2021 into this January. And it was, unseasonably strong. And so when you look at, for example, at the NAR reports the seasonally adjusted home sales numbers. And in January and December and January, they were at 6.5 million. They were way, way high. And it's because it was unseasonally strong. It was the seasonal adjustments then overstated what was going on. And so you could imagine that the other side of that bullwhip happens now, which is all of that demand was bullwhipping up one side, and now and so we get this counter seasonal, even stronger downside, demand fall off these holidays. So that's a real scenario that we can watch play out. And so that would be unseasonally having inventory climb starting in mid-October. And so in 3 weeks, I currently expect 2 or 3 more weeks of rising, slightly rising inventory that based on the historical and the current fact of, the rising rate market, and all the other macro things that are super scary that make buyers not want to buy. So then, if it's now mid-October and late October, and that keeps climbing, that's when we'll see the unseasonal. That would be an unseasonal change, and then be a new signal to pay attention to.
All right. So if we climb in October, that's because we have existing listings that are sitting. And as the natural evolution of new listings come to market, we get a build. So we have an aging inventory of open listings. Days on market starts to extend. But we also have some powerful waves behind us. And we know that the trolls hate it when Logan talks about this, but he talks about demographics, and we have this wave of 30 to 35-year-olds who are in that peak home buying stage, who, like it or not, are going to need a roof over their head at some point. And maybe that's renting, maybe that's a home. We are also sitting on record amounts of housing wealth, which means that very few people are forced into a sales scenario, or at least a distressed sales scenario. And the listings that are coming to market from those people who do have equity in their home means that the buyers are likely in the hunt for another home to purchase. How do you think those two positive demographic and economic characteristics, housing wealth, and first-time home buyers coming of age impact or counteract potential rising inventory in Q4?
My suspicion is that in Q4 they don't like have that short-term kind of impact, where it's like, there's some home buyers now. There are cash-ready buyers now. There's a lot of cash. There's still a lot of cash, in the economy and in people's bank accounts and investor money and things like that. So there are people who are actively looking for bargains, and they may start to find some of those. Especially people who like trying to sell at that point. The longer term trends, they feel generally optimistic to me, and generally optimistic means like, we have buyers, we have well-financed homeowners. And so those are, really bullish things for, like normally would be super bullish signals for the market. And so how much does that counteract 7% interest rates? What if we get into January and they're 8%? Like, what does that mean? Even a few months ago, 7% was really hard for me to imagine. And so in general, but those are like those are things that prevent massive selling. We're at record few homeowners in any kind of distressed mortgage scenario. We're at record employment levels. So like all of those things like can change, and then we'll have different implications for housing down the street. And the most bearish scenarios are those people who assume that, yep, we're going to have massive, big recession and massive unemployment, and therefore we're going to have people who sell their homes, and that will kick in. And I'm not skilled enough with macroeconomy to know how likely that is, or what other scenarios are possible there.
Let's bring it back to your area of expertise. So let's talk about home prices a little bit, Mike. So Altos has an incredible number and depth of different data points and signals that help housing professionals better understand which direction the market is headed. Can you talk about some of the data points, the signals that impact your views on which direction home prices are moving? And we can kind of look at that from a local level, at a zip code level, or raise up to national, kind of depending on which angle you want to attack from.
Well, the leading indicator stats are the same whether you're looking locally or nationally. There's a handful of stats. So, we watch every home for sale in the country, all the pricing and the changes in the pricing and the new ones that are on the market, and all of those dynamics to bubble up, the answer that how's the market question.
Yeah.
The traditional housing data, like the Case-Shiller index, which was announced, I think yesterday is lagging, right? It was announced for the July number.
Yep.
Was announced yesterday, and at the end of September, and that uses May, June, and July transaction data. Well, those homes that sold in May, they got listed in April. Like that's a vastly different market than what we have now.
And I think you've helped me understand this in the past, but so like the Case-Shiller number is actually measuring the movement in specific homes. So like you take one address and watch what it sold at last time, watch what it sold at the next time. That's a measure of a true view of home price appreciation or declines in housing prices. And you're taking a different angle of looking at listing data, which is what enables you to have more real-time and forward-looking viewpoints.
Yes, exactly. And so, the Case-Shiller and they're called repeat sales indexes that like you look at the house and this house sold for 100,000 here and it sold for 200,000 here over that time. Like, and you do that enough and you get a, that index of how much home prices appreciate. The question that we're answering with the Altos data is, if I walk into the market now, what do homes cost? Are there a lot of them? Like, do I have to make an offer quickly? Am I going to have selection? Can I lowball? If I want to invest and make more money, and that's all of that signal is in the active market. We can see, so one of the leading indicators that we like is the percentage of homes on the market that have taken a price reduction from the original list price last few months, taking a price cut. And what you learn is that, as a rule of thumb, about a third of listings take a price cut. They're overpriced, and sometimes that's intentional, and sometimes it's accidental, and sometimes it's a crazy seller who wants to test the market. But a third, and then when the market cools, then all of a sudden it's like 35-40% need to take a price cut. Or when the market heats up, it's maybe only like a third think they're overpriced, but maybe only 25 have to take a price cut because some of those crazy sellers got their offer. And so, you could see, so when houses are on the market now and only 15% need to take a price cut, like those are transactions that haven't happened yet. But we know that the demand is there because nobody needs to cut their price because they're getting their offers and they're having bidding wars and all those things. And so it's really forward looking for transactions that are going to happen in the future. So the Case-Shiller number for July, like you can see that's announced in September, like you can see that in the February, March, April, if you're looking in the real-time data, like it's months ahead. And it's, one of the challenges of using a thing like a Case-Shiller or a sales index to do any decision making, because those are transactions that happened a long time ago, and it's got very little to do with the market today. So I like price reductions as a leading indicator from the local market comparison. So nationally, it's about a third is our rule of thumb. But in markets that have big, like more new construction and more investor activity, it actually tends to be more like 40%. So Dallas or Phoenix, about 40% of the market tends to take a price cut, before it sells.
And that's your historical baseline, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And did I hear in one of your recent updates, you're saying nationally we're about 40% right now?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're at 40%, 40.41, I think, as of this week. 41% as of this week. And so price reductions they flattened out in August, and they've accelerated in the last 2 weeks as rates spiked. And so it's really noticeable. Like if you've got your house on the market and you didn't get, all of a sudden you realize there's no offers this week because everybody just got afraid. You cut your price to see maybe I can scare out some buyers because I want to get this thing sold before the holidays. So that happens. And price reductions normally peak in October. And then at then the market cleans up and things get withdrawn, or, you don't get new listings. And so that resets into over the holidays and starts to decline typically through March. And then now that the first quarter homes didn't sell in the second quarter, price reductions start ticking up in the second quarter. So that's that annual cycle there. And so at 41%, it is it's more than normal, more than our rule of thumb, which is, really indicates flat home price gains, in the next year. You can see that demand is way down, and but it's not catastrophic. During the bubble bursting, is 50% of the homes around the country had taken a price cut in the last 90 days. And more than 50%. And there are some markets around the country right now where price reductions are really even higher. So Phoenix, Boise, the Utah markets, these are all some of the Florida markets. These were the biggest boom markets during the pandemic. And you have, and they hit the brakes the hardest. So you could see those. And so those are pretty bearish for home price gains, like probably negative for next year in those markets.
Do you see, so like let's use Boise as an example. Have you figured out a mathematical correlation between the home price reduction and what we'd expect to see in Case-Shiller home prices 45 days from now?
I don't. We don't correlate it to the price reductions to Case-Shiller, but you can correlate the ask prices very directly to the sold prices that they're going to sell at. And in general, sellers know exactly where to price a house to get it to sell. Listing agents and sellers, they in general, any given house may be over or underpriced, but in general, the markets ask roughly about where they're going to sell. In a cold market, it's like 96% sales to list price. In a hot market, it's like 104%. In the crazy hot market earlier this year, it was probably more like 106, 108%. Where there tons of overbidding. When mortgage rates are 2.5%, you can just overbid and it doesn't change your payment by that much. So like those, but in general, you can see exactly where they're gonna go. And then, so that's just like looking at the median price of, all the active homes on the market. And there's earlier signal than that too, where we look at the cohort of properties that were newly listed this week. And there's signal in that. So if I'm going to list my house, I know that there's nobody that made offers last week in this price range. I am going to price a little bit lower, need a little bit of discount. And so the price of the newly listed cohort actually turns a month before the full active market, which turns a month before the ones going into contract, and which turns a month before the sales turn. So it's like there's this 4-month inflection point dominoes that you can watch fall when the inflection points hit. Interesting.
So, okay, can you run through that domino effect for us for what we should expect in the fourth quarter of this year? I know we kind of hit on that earlier in topics of interest rates and inventory, but I want to sing it back one more time. What are the dominoes telling us for the rest of this year?
So they've actually been the dominoes have been pretty muted on price reduction, like on home prices falling yet. So seasonally coming down, but it does every year. Prices peak June 30th and then tick back from there. And so because, if you're selling a little bit later in the year, you do a little bit of a discount, like, oops, I'm late in the summer. I need to make sure this thing moves. So you do a little bit of a discount in aggregate. And so they're indicating not dramatic home price adjustments yet. What remains to be seen are, this spike from rates from 5.5 to 7, and how long does that persist? So does that persist through the into the spring? Then we would see real then we really, what I really love to look at the new listings cohort is between the second and third week of January. Because that's like the first indication of the spring selling market. And you can watch the steepness of that curve, like the second derivative, of that curve, and get a real indication for how the whole year is going to play out. So what you'll see though in things like the Case-Shiller for the rest of the year is, as the overbidding stuff came out of the market, the Case-Shiller stuff is going to correct down a lot more than the active market data will. So there's going to be more, and we're still going to see that, even if the market starts like turning back up for January, we're going to see those Case-Shiller numbers reporting really bearish through the second quarter of next year because of how lagging they are. We can already see that that's what we're going to get on those headlines.
I can see the CNBC headlines now. It's painful.
It is painful, and it's why I like, as I sometimes say, my favorite times with the Altos and the Altos data are when we get to be contrarian and bullish at the same time. So the headlines are still bearish and lagging, but the market has actually picked up. So fingers crossed we get to do that, in the first quarter next year, and hopefully we're not like, in a market where it's like it's everything's heading down and everybody knows it.
I think the audience will know next time they see Mike Simonsen on the Housing News podcast. It's likely because he gets to be contrarian and bullish.
That's right.
We'll time that. That's the market signal everybody should watch for. So Mike, another important component of the housing market is rents. And in your Altos updates, you've also shared that we've had 3 or 4 weeks of slightly declining rents. Can you go deeper into this trend and maybe with a little background on what we've seen over the last 2 years and rent changes, and then what we're seeing play out right now?
Yeah, and that's, I'm looking at with that number in specific. I was talking about rents of single family homes, and I shared it a few weeks ago because elevated rents is another one of these bullish factors for home prices. And it's like, if I can get, my mortgage is super low and my rents are super high, it's a pretty good time to not sell my house.
Yeah.
And so that argues, like, it's another reason why it doesn't seem like we're going to have any kind of flood of distressed sellers. And so rents have been super high, and they've been stubbornly high. So they've been, like, they haven't come down yet, even though we could see, demand back off, purchase demand back way off. We hadn't seen rents start to tick down yet. We have seen it in the last 3 weeks. And so there's small changes. And so, like, maybe it's noise. It's not a dramatic trend, but it's an early signal that I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And we know that, there's a common perception, and it, like, sort of would make intuitive sense that home prices and rents would move inverse from each other. Like, if I'm not buying, I'm renting, and therefore rents would go up. But it turns out they actually move together. It is household formation really that drives it. I'm moving out from my roommates, and either I'm going to rent a place or I'm going to buy a place, or I'm moving out from my parents because I'm, a millennial and I'm at that age. I'm either rent or buy. So that demand for housing moves together. So in general, they move up and down together, and not inverse.
So you don't see declining rents as a potentially another negative signal for home prices or home sales, because hey, the house is more affordable, or the rent is more affordable, so I'll just rent a little bit longer instead of going to home ownership. That's just not the relationship that you've seen in the data.
That's not what I see, or what I would expect. What I would expect is, I'm afraid of the economy. I'm afraid for my job. I'm not moving out. Mm-hmm. And we're going to delay doing any decision like that because the world is scary right now, and therefore everything notches down. I
love following loan originators and real estate agents on social media. There's been 3 trends that I've seen really pop out the last 2 months. The whole meme around marry the house, date the rate, which I think is kind of legit. You can always refi down the road. You have to be able to afford your initial payment. Then we've seen the trends the last month as rates shot up to 7% of the rate buy downs, and loan originators actually out there talking about buy downs. If you're staying in this house for a while, there's ways to get around the 7% rate out the gate. And then the one I've seen pop the last 2 weeks has been the interest rate on your rent is 100%, and trying to use that as the the push that moves people from the rental market to the home ownership market. But it kind of turns out that third social media trend is kind of debunked if that's not actually the decision making process. The data tells us is how people act.
I mean, I think the marry the house, date the rent there's some merit, or date the rate is there's some merit there in, we're always afraid that we are buying at the top or selling at the bottom, and we're no matter who we are making this transaction, we're afraid that that's happening. And I don't want to buy right now because it feels like everything's going to collapse. But if you find some people say, Mike, should I wait or should I buy now? What's your advice? And my advice always in that sense is look, if you can afford that house and you love that house, buy the house. If you can't afford it or you don't love it, don't buy the house because you think you need to, right? Don't think you don't do it because it's the time. Like I need to get in, like it's not the right house for you. And I think that still holds true now. And I had a friend who's, buying a mountain house, and he was asking me this week, thinking about waiting. And I was like, what are you going to wait for? And you could try to time the market, but how likely is it that you're going to get that exactly right? And meanwhile, you're going to wait a ski season without your ski house.
Yeah. I shared on Twitter that back in 2009, I won an auction to buy a house in Florida for $50,000. And I got scared and gave it to the second highest bidder at no profit to myself. But in hindsight, should have bought that house. And it's worth about $400,000 now. And it would have been a great rental property that I owned when I was in my early 20s, which would have been phenomenal. I didn't do that. And now I still look at that neighborhood as like a $50,000 to $100,000 neighborhood, but it's just not. And you can't wait around for that next GFC to get here and buy houses at $50,000 because the data is not showing that that's the path, despite what the trolls on Twitter like to say to you and I. So what do you think is one of the things that the trolls on Twitter just massively misunderstand or want to be true about the housing market that the data just doesn't prove out?
Well, so certainly the view of the distressed properties coming to market it's like if you pay attention to the actual data on the distressed sellers and what makes a distressed seller, it seems like we'd have massive economic dislocation before we get to any distressed seller, and then it's another year out. So maybe we get if we get a big job loss recession in 2023, then maybe we get some of those in 2020, that inventory in 2024. And it could be that could happen. But in general, we still, Americans still have the best mortgage deals ever, and their credit quality is higher than ever. And all of those things bode really well for not having a big wave of distressed sellers. And so, the housing, the bears in housing generally have a really bearish view of the global economy, the American economy, the Fed and the ability to control like all of the things all the way down, and therefore then they project it into a major crash coming for housing. The one thing, home prices went up in a big steep thing, and so there, you can imagine a correction that you can make sense there, but the part of that it assumes that we're going to have a big wave of distressed sellers or of any sellers at all is I'm super skeptical of.
Yeah, I think it comes down to using the right vocabulary too, and the difference between a slight correction and a bubble are entirely different things. And so I think something worth paying close attention to. Mike, I love how analytical you are when looking at housing data and thinking about the markets. And I'm sure there's some things you've learned from the data that you watch closely. So I'm going to close out the interview with one final question. What is one strongly held belief that you've changed your mind on in 2022? And maybe that's about the housing market. Maybe it's something entirely different. But this year has been a year of rapid change in many parts of our lives and the businesses and that we operate and the industry that we operate in. So what is one strongly held belief that you've changed your mind on?
Well, I would so I'm wrong a lot, and I actually try to make a point of like pointing out like, oh, I was wrong with that call. I do that in my videos as much as I can. I think it's a really useful technique to help find. But watching, I have like I always say I have no ability to predict mortgage rates. I bought my first house in the mid 90s at like 8.25%, and I assumed it was such a good deal. I locked it in for 30 years. I bought my second house in 2001 at 6.5%, and it was such a good deal. I locked it in for 30 years. And then, I bought my third house and, in whatever, 2015, and it was at 4.5%, and I locked it in for 30 years, and so then the beginning of this year, I'm like, well, it sure seems like I refinanced, I'm super low, and I'm locked in for 30 years again. And so I it seemed like at the beginning of the year, I would say interest rates, seemed like they would go up, but I thought they'd go up a year and a half ago too. And they didn't. So I don't know what's going to happen. I never thought about that we would see 7% by September. It's way outside of what any of my assumptions would have been. I talked with some really smart people on mortgage rates early in the year, and I said, "What do you think? Like, what should we expect? Because I don't know where they go." And they were, like 4.5, 5%. And I thought, wow, 5% would be a big change. So 7 it's outside of any of the things assumptions I've made. And I don't know what the impacts are of that. Like, we started Altos in 2006, January 1 of 2006. And that's about where rates were, in the 6s and 7s at that time, and 6s. So they've essentially only gone down since then.
So basically, you've learned, don't fight the Fed.
Don't fight the Fed. Yeah. And so, man, I don't know what that, what the implications are of that really. And I also don't know, the Fed was buying mortgage bonds during the pandemic. What policy do they go with next? What do they go from here? Does that, are they done forever and mortgage rates go over 10? I don't know.
Well, I'm taking your recommendation that you've shared with me in the past. I just ordered Nick Timoros's $1 Trillion Triage book. So hopefully that'll help me with a little deeper understanding of how to interpret the nuance of Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's literally, it's like I can't believe I'm riveted to a day-by-day account of what the policy changes are happening. But I found it terrific.
Awesome. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
All right, Clayton.
Really appreciate your dive into the housing market.
Nice talking to you.